So this module is all about narrative writing, and you will begin your Teachers as Writers narrative writing assignment in this module. But one of the things I really want you to gain from this module is a more complex understanding of narrative itself. And often when we think of narrative writing, we think of storybooks, right, or personal narratives. But I want you to recognize that narrative stories are everywhere, right? So people use stories in persuasive writing. You'll see stories in advertisements, you'll see stories in information texts. So sometimes some of my favorite writers, some of my favorite science writers or history writers use stories all the time. And in all kinds of texts you will find narrative writing. So for example, this is the book Teaching to Transgress, Education as the Practice of Freedom. And this book is by Bell Hooks, and it's a series of essays to transform education. But she uses stories and personal stories to talk about bigger issues, and stories are how we think and are really, really important. So let me just share a small part from here. Almost all of our teachers at Booker T. Washington were Black women. They were committed to nurturing intellect so that we could become scholars, thinkers, and cultural workers, Black folks who used our minds. We learned early that our devotion to learning, to a life of the mind, was a counter-hegemonic act, a fundamental way to resist every strategy of white racist colonization. Though they did not define or articulate these practices in theoretical terms, my teachers were enacting a revolutionary pedagogy of resistance that was profoundly anti-colonial. Within these segregated schools, Black children who were deemed exceptional gifted were given a special care. Teachers worked with and for us to ensure that we would fulfill our intellectual destiny and by doing so uplift the race. My teachers were on a mission. To fulfill that mission, my teachers made sure they knew us. They knew our parents, our economic status, where we worshipped, what our homes were like, and how we were treated in the family. I went to school at a historic moment where I was being taught by the same teachers who had taught my mother, her sisters, and brothers. My effort and ability to learn was always contextualized within the framework of generational family experience. Certain behaviors, gestures, habits of being were tracked back. Attending school then was a sheer joy. I loved being a student. I loved learning. School was the place of ecstasy, pleasure, and danger. To be changed by ideas was pure pleasure. But to learn ideas that ran counter to values and beliefs learned at home was to place oneself at risk, to enter the danger zone. Home was the place where I was forced to conform to someone else's image of who and what I should be. School was the place where I could forget that self and through ideas reinvent myself. School changed utterly with racial integration. Gone was the messianic zeal to transform our minds and beings that had characterized the teachers and pedagogical practices in our all-Black schools. Knowledge was suddenly about information only. It had no relation to how one lived, behaved. It was no longer connected to anti-racist struggle. Bus to white schools we soon learned that obedience and not a zealous will to learn was what was expected of us. Too much eagerness to learn would easily be seen as a threat to white authority. So that's just a moment in Bell Hook's book about transitioning from a segregated black school to a desegregated school. She's telling a personal story, but then she connects that story to much bigger issues, and then goes on to talk about transformative education. So she's just one amazing writer that I just love the way that she draws you in and really challenges you to think with personal stories. But as you approach this week's work, and as you go through the module, I also want you to sort of think beyond this class and really, like, as you're watching TV and reading other books and engaging, look for narrative everywhere. Look for stories everywhere, because stories are everywhere. As you're talking to other people, think, oh, there's a story, there's a story. They're everywhere. They are how we as humans deeply connect with one another. And that's just one of the reasons that I think stories are so powerful and so important. So keep looking out for stories. And the other thing I'd really like to invite you to do, and this is a challenge, but you're going to begin an assignment, your narrative assignment in this module. And I know that this is something that you're required to do as an assignment. But I really, really want to invite you to look beyond this as an assignment. Like, what is your purpose for writing a narrative? What would be your audience? Who would you want to share this with? And if you can, try and make it something that is personally meaningful to you. It's not just for me, right? This is something that's meaningful for you. And I've given you a few ideas about different ways that you might approach this assignment. But ultimately, it is up to you. So I wish you the best of luck. And I look forward to reading your writing and watching your posts. Bye.